The Mafia boss gives a makeover to a sloppy woman. Her new flawless look stuns everyone, but what nobody satisfying expected was the reason why he did it. And trust me, by the end of this story, you will understand that sometimes the most powerful transformations have nothing to do with clothes or makeup. They have everything to do with what someone sees in you when the whole world has already looked away. It was a freezing Tuesday morning in Brooklyn, New York, the kind of cold that bit through your jacket and made your bones ache. The streets were slick with overnight rain, and the sky hung low and grey like a concrete ceiling pressing down on the city. Most people were rushing to work, heads down, earbuds in, avoiding eye contact with anyone and everything. That was just how New York operated. You kept moving, you kept your head low, and you never ever stopped to look at the people the city had forgotten. But on the corner of Flatbush and Atlantic, sitting on an overturned milk crate outside a shuttered laundromat, was a woman most people pretended not to see. Her name was Grace Holloway. She was 43 years old, though the lines on her face and the exhaustion behind her eyes made her look at least a decade older. Her brown hair was matted and tangled, pulled back in a loose knot that had not seen a brush in days. She wore a men's oversized coat that was torn at the seams, stained with coffee and street grime, layered over two mismatched sweaters, and a pair of sweatpants tucked into boots that had long lost their soles. A plastic bag sat beside her, holding everything she owned in this world. A few crumpled documents, a toothbrush with flattened bristles, a photograph she never showed anyone. Grace had not always been this way. There was a time not so long ago when she had a home, a career, a future that seemed certain. She had worked as an administrative assistant at a real estate firm in Manhattan. She had an apartment in Queens. She had a cat, named Oliver, and a small balcony where she grew basil and tomatoes during the summer. She had a life. But life, as it often does, had other plans. It started with the layoffs. The firm downsized, and Grace was the first to go. Then the rent increased. Then the savings disappeared. Then the eviction notice came. And just like that, in the span of 11 months, Grace Holloway went from a woman with a routine and a purpose to a woman sitting on a milk crate on a cold Brooklyn morning, invisible to the world. She did not beg. She never held a sign. She simply sat there, watching the city move around her like a river flowing past a stone. Sometimes someone would drop $1 near her feet. Sometimes a woman would hand her a granola bar without making eye contact. But most of the time, people walked by as if she were part of the sidewalk, just another piece of the urban landscape that did not deserve a second glance. That particular Tuesday, however, something different was about to happen, something that would change Grace Holloway's life in ways she could never have imagined. 3 blocks away, a black Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows rolled slowly down Atlantic Avenue. Behind the wheel sat a broad-shouldered man named Enzo, who had been driving for the Moretti family for over 15 years. And in the back seat, scrolling through his phone with a calm, almost bored expression, was Dominic Moretti. Dominic was 51 years old. He had silver-streaked black hair combed neatly back, a clean-shaven jaw and dark eyes that carried the weight of 1,000 decisions most people would never have to make. He wore a charcoal cashmere overcoat, a navy suit underneath, and shoes that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He smelled of sandalwood and espresso. He was, by every measure the world used, a powerful man. The Moretti family had operated in New York for 3 generations. They were involved in construction, real estate, restaurants, private security, and a network of businesses that stretched across the 5 boroughs and into New Jersey. Dominic had inherited the empire from his father, Salvatore, who had inherited it from his father, Carmine. The family name carried weight. It opened doors. It silenced rooms. And Dominic wore that name with the quiet confidence of a man who had never needed to raise his voice to be heard. But Dominic Moretti was not the man the newspapers made him out to be. The tabloids painted him as a ruthless figure, a man who operated in shadows and controlled empires through intimidation. And while there was certainly a hardness to him, a steel in his spine that came from decades of navigating a world where trust was currency and betrayal was common, there was also something else, something most people never saw. Dominic Moretti had a code, a set of principles that had been drilled into him by his mother, Rosa, who had passed away 6 years ago from cancer. Rosa had always told him the same thing. She would hold his face in her hands, look directly into his eyes and say, "Dominic, the world will judge you by your power, but God will judge you by your mercy. Never forget the people who have nothing, because you were nothing once too." Dominic never forgot those words. They lived in him like a heartbeat, constant and quiet, guiding every decision he made when no one was watching. The Escalade stopped at a red light on the corner of Flatbush and Atlantic. Dominic looked up from his phone and glanced out. The window. That was when he saw her, Grace Holloway. Sitting on her milk crate, shoulders hunched against the cold, staring at the ground with an expression that was not sadness exactly, but something worse. It was resignation, the look of a person who had stopped expecting anything from the world. Dominic watched her for a long moment. The light turned green. Enzo began to pull forward. "Stop the car," Dominic said. Enzo glanced in the rearview mirror. "Boss?" "Stop the car, Enzo." The Escalade pulled to the curb. Dominic continued to watch Grace through the window. He studied her posture, her clothes, the way she held herself. There was something in the way she sat, something in the straightness of her spine despite everything, that caught his attention. It was dignity, buried under layers of neglect and hardship, but still there, still visible, like a light flickering behind a dirty window. Dominic opened the door and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The cold air hit him immediately, but he did not flinch. He walked toward Grace with measured steps, his hands in his coat pockets, his expression unreadable. People on the street moved out of his way instinctively, not because they knew who he was, but because there was something about the way he carried himself that demanded space. Grace did not look up until his shadow fell over her. She raised her eyes slowly, expecting to see a cop or a store owner telling her to move along. Instead, she saw a man in an expensive coat looking at her with an expression she could not quite place. It was not pity. It was not disgust. It was something closer to recognition, as if he was seeing something in her that she herself had forgotten existed. "Cold morning?" Dominic said. His voice was deep but not harsh. It had a slight rasp to it, like aged wood. Grace blinked. "Yeah," she said. "It is." "How long have you been out here?" She shrugged. "A while." Dominic looked at her for another moment. Then he reached into his inside pocket and pulled out a business card. It was cream-colored, thick stock, with a single name embossed in dark ink. He held it out to her. Grace stared at the card, but did not take it. "I do not need charity," she said quietly. There was no anger in her voice, just a tired firmness. "Good," Dominic replied, "because I am not offering charity." She looked up at him again, searching his face for some kind of angle, some kind of trick. In her experience, when someone in a nice coat approached you on the street, they either wanted something from you or they wanted to feel good about themselves by giving you something small and walking away. "Then what are you offering?" she asked. Dominic tilted his head slightly, the way a man does when he is making a decision he has already made. "A chance," he said simply. "Come to this address tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock, ask for Dominic. If you do not come, that is fine. But if you do, I promise you, your life will not be the same." He placed the card on the crate beside her, turned and walked back to the Escalade. The door closed, the engine hummed, and the black SUV pulled away into traffic, disappearing around the corner like a dream that had lasted only 30 seconds. Grace sat there staring at the card. Her fingers were numb from the cold, but she picked it up carefully as if it might dissolve. The address was in Manhattan. The card had no title, no company name, just Dominic and a phone number. She almost threw it away. She almost crumpled it up and tossed it into the gutter, because hope, when you have been without it for long enough, starts to feel dangerous. It starts to feel like a trap. And Grace Holloway had been burned enough times to know that the world did not hand out second chances to people like her. But she did not throw it away. She slipped it into her coat pocket, pressed her hand against it through the fabric, and sat there for a long time, watching the traffic and wondering if she had the courage to find out what was on the other side of that address. That night, Grace found shelter at a small community center near Prospect Park. She managed to get a cot and a thin blanket, which was more than she had most nights. She lay in the dark, surrounded by the sounds of other people sleeping, coughing, shifting restlessly on their cots, and she thought about the man in the expensive coat. She replayed the conversation in her mind over and over. His voice, his eyes, the way he had said a chance as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She pulled the business card from her pocket and held it in the dim light coming through the window. The address was on the Upper East Side, a neighborhood Grace had not visited in years, a neighborhood where people had doormen and fresh flowers in their lobbies, and dogs that wore sweaters that cost more than her entire wardrobe. What could a man like that possibly want with a woman like her? The question circled in her mind like a bird trapped in a room. She thought about ignoring it. She thought about staying on her crate, staying invisible, staying safe in the predictability of her misery. Because at least misery was familiar. At least it did not require her to hope. But then she thought about something her mother used to say. Her mother, Helen, who had raised Grace and her two brothers alone in a small house in upstate New York after their father left. Helen used to say, "Grace, the world will knock you down 100 times, but the only time you truly lose is when you stop getting up." Grace closed her eyes. She pressed the business card to her chest, and she made a decision. She would go. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. Every week, we bring you stories so powerful they will stay with you for days. Stories about real people, real struggles, and real transformations. If you do not want to miss a single one, subscribe now and turn on notifications, because the next story might be the one that changes how you see the world. The next morning, Grace woke before dawn. The community center was still dark, and the air smelled of instant coffee and disinfectant. She lay on her cot for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the decision she had made pressing down on her like a physical thing. Her stomach was tight with nerves. Her hands were trembling slightly, and she could not tell if it was from the cold or from fear. She got up quietly, gathered her plastic bag of belongings, and made her way to the small bathroom at the end of the hall. The mirror above the sink was cracked in one corner, and the fluorescent light above it buzzed and flickered. Grace stood in front of that mirror and looked at herself. Really looked. And what she saw made her chest ache. Her skin was dull and dry. Her eyes, which had once been a striking shade of green, looked faded, like a photograph left too long in the sun. Her hair was a mess, tangled and greasy. And there were dark circles under her eyes that no amount of sleep could erase. She looked tired, not just physically tired, but tired in a way that went deeper than that. Soul tired. The kind of exhaustion that comes from fighting a battle you have been losing for years. She washed her face with cold water, ran her fingers through her hair as best she could, and straightened her clothes. It was not much, but it was all she had. She took a deep breath, looked at herself one more time, and said, quietly, "Okay, Grace, let us see what this is about." The subway ride to the Upper East Side took about 40 minutes. Grace sat in the corner of the car, clutching her plastic bag on her lap, watching the stations flash by through the window. She felt out of place. She always felt out of place, but today it was sharper, more acute. She was going to a world that was not hers, to meet a man she did not know, based on a promise she did not understand. Everything about it screamed that she should turn around, go back to her crate, go back to the safety of invisibility. But she kept going. She emerged from the subway at 77th Street and Lexington and walked east toward the address on the card. The neighborhood was pristine. Clean sidewalks, polished brownstones, luxury cars parked along the curb. Women in wool coats walked small dogs. Men in suits talked on their phones. Everyone looked like they belonged. Everyone except Grace. She found the building. It was a 5-story limestone townhouse with tall windows and a black lacquered door. There were small boxwood hedges flanking the entrance and a brass knocker shaped like a lion's head. Grace stood on the sidewalk and stared at it for a full minute, her heart hammering in her chest. "Just walk away," a voice in her head whispered. "This is not for you. This was never for you." But she thought about her mother. She thought about Helen's voice. She thought about getting up. Grace climbed the 3 stone steps and knocked. The door was opened almost immediately by a woman in her early 60s, with silver hair pulled into a neat chignon and warm brown eyes behind tortoise-shell glasses. She wore a cream silk blouse and dark trousers, and she smelled faintly of lavender. Her name, Grace would soon learn, was Mariana. She had been Dominic Moretti's personal assistant for over 20 years. "You must be Grace," Mariana said, and her voice was kind. Not the performative kindness of someone doing a good deed, but the genuine warmth of a person who understood what it meant to feel uncertain. Yes," Grace stammered. "Dominic told me to come." Mariana smiled. "He is expecting you. Please come in." Grace stepped inside and immediately felt as if she had entered another world. The foyer was all marble and dark wood, with a sweeping staircase and a chandelier that cast soft golden light across the walls. There were oil paintings in gilded frames, fresh white roses in a crystal vase, and a silence that felt not empty but peaceful. It was the kind of home that whispered of old money and quiet power. Grace felt her cheeks flush. She was painfully aware of her stained coat, her worn boots, the plastic bag in her hand. She felt like a smudge on a clean page. She wanted to shrink, to disappear, to apologize for taking up space in a place so obviously not meant for someone like her. Mariana seemed to sense this. She placed a gentle hand on Grace's arm and said, "You are welcome here. Can I take your coat?" Grace hesitated, then slowly removed her coat. Underneath, her mismatched sweaters and stained sweatpants were on full display. She stood there, exposed, vulnerable, feeling as if every imperfection was magnified under the soft light of the foyer. "This way," Mariana said, leading her down a hallway lined with photographs. Grace caught glimpses of black and white images. A man and a woman at a wedding, children playing on a beach, an older woman with kind eyes standing in a garden. Family, history, roots, everything Grace had lost. They entered a sitting room at the back of the house. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a small courtyard garden. There was a fireplace with a low fire burning, 2 leather armchairs, and a coffee table set with a silver tray, a porcelain pot of coffee, 2 cups, and a plate of almond biscotti. And there, standing by the window with his hands clasped behind his back, was Dominic Moretti. He was dressed more casually than the day before. Dark sweater, dark trousers, no coat, but he still carried that same quiet authority, that same gravitational pull that made you feel as if you were in the presence of someone who had lived more life than most people could imagine. He turned when Grace entered and studied her for a moment, not with judgment, not with pity, but with that same look of recognition she had seen on the street corner. As if he were seeing past the surface, past the clothes and the tangled hair and the exhaustion to something underneath. "You came," he said. "I almost did not," Grace admitted. "I know," he said. "Sit down. Have some coffee. You look like you could use it." Grace sat in one of the armchairs. The leather was soft and warm from the fire. She accepted a cup of coffee from Mariana, wrapping both hands around it, letting the heat seep into her cold fingers. The coffee was strong and rich, with a hint of something she could not identify. Hazelnut, maybe, or cardamom. It was the best coffee she had ever tasted, and the simple pleasure of it, the warmth, the taste, the quiet room, almost made her cry. Dominic sat across from her and crossed one leg over the other. He did not speak right away. He let the silence settle, gave her space to breathe, to adjust, to feel something other than the constant survival mode she had been living in. Finally, he said, "I am going to tell you something, Grace, and I want you to listen carefully." She nodded. "I grew up in this city. My family has been here for generations. We have built businesses, employed people, supported communities, but I am not going to pretend we are saints. We are complicated people. We have done complicated things. That is the truth, and I do not run from the truth." He paused, sipped his coffee, and continued. "My mother, Rosa, she was the heart of this family. She was the one who kept us honest. She was the one who reminded us that no matter how much power we had, we were still human beings with a responsibility to other human beings. When she was alive, she ran a program, nothing fancy, no press conferences, no tax write-offs. She would find women who were struggling, women who had fallen through the cracks, and she would help them rebuild, not with handouts, with structure, with tools, with dignity." Grace listened, her hands still wrapped around her cup. "When she died," Dominic said, and here his voice shifted slightly, taking on a rougher edge, "I let the program die with her. I told myself I was too busy. I told myself it was her thing, not mine. But the truth is I was just grieving, and sometimes grief makes cowards of us." He looked at Grace directly. 6 months ago, I decided to restart her program, in her honor. I have been looking for the right person to be the first, and yesterday when I saw you on that corner, I knew." Grace frowned. "Knew what?" "I knew you were not supposed to be there. I can see it. You are not someone who gave up on life. You are someone life gave up on. There is a difference." The words hit Grace like a wave. She felt her throat tighten and her eyes sting. She looked down at her cup to hide it, but Dominic had already seen, and he did not look away. He did not pretend he had not noticed. "Here is what I am offering," he said. "It is not money. It is not a handout. It is a complete transformation. Appearance, skills, confidence, opportunity. I have a team, stylists, trainers, mentors, career counselors. Over the next 30 days, they are going to work with you. They are going to help you become the version of yourself you lost. And at the end of those 30 days, you are going to walk into a room, and the people in that room are going to see what I saw on that street corner. Potential." Grace stared at him. "Why?" she whispered. "Because my mother asked me to, and because I have spent too many years ignoring that request." There was a long silence. The fire crackled. Outside, a bird sang in the courtyard garden. Grace felt something inside her crack open. Not break, crack open, like a seed pushing through frozen ground. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. "I do not even know where to start," she said. Dominic smiled. It was a rare thing, that smile. It softened his entire face and made him look for just a moment like the boy his mother had raised before the world had hardened him. "You do not have to," he said. "That is what the team is for." And just like that, Grace Holloway's transformation began. The first person she met was Valentina Cruz, a stylist who had worked with celebrities, diplomats, and socialites across 3 continents. Valentina was 47, Dominican-American, with cropped black hair and an energy that could power a small city. She walked into the sitting room that afternoon, took one look at Grace, and clapped her hands together. "Oh, honey," she said, circling Grace like an artist studying a blank canvas. "We have got so much to work with here." Grace shifted uncomfortably. "I know I look—" "You look like a woman who has been surviving," Valentina interrupted firmly. "And surviving takes everything you have, which means there is nothing left for yourself. That is not a failure. That is a sacrifice. And now we are going to give some of that back to you." Valentina took Grace to a salon on Madison Avenue, not through the front door, but through a private entrance in the back. Dominic had arranged it. Grace sat in a chair surrounded by mirrors and lights and the smell of expensive products, and for a moment she felt like she might be sick, not from the luxury, but from the dissonance. The gap between who she was and where she was felt like a canyon she could not cross. But Valentina was patient. She talked to Grace the whole time, not about the transformation, not about hair and skin and products, but about Grace herself. She asked about her childhood, about her mother, about the basil and tomatoes on the balcony, about Oliver, the cat. And slowly, carefully, as Grace began to talk, The tension in her body began to release. Her shoulders dropped, her breathing slowed, and when the stylist started working on her hair, cutting away the damaged ends, washing out months of neglect, Grace closed her eyes and let it happen. It took 4 hours. When Valentina finally turned the chair around so Grace could see herself in the mirror, the room went quiet. Grace's hair had been cut to just above her shoulders. It was clean and shining, a rich chestnut brown with natural highlights that the stylist had brought out with a subtle glaze. Her skin had been cleansed and moisturized, and the dullness was gone, replaced by a soft glow. Her eyebrows had been shaped, her nails had been filed and painted a neutral rose. She looked like herself, not like a different person, not like a celebrity or a model. She looked like Grace Holloway on her best day, the Grace who had once grown basil on a balcony and laughed at Oliver's antics and walked to work with purpose in her stride. Grace stared at her reflection, her chin trembled, her eyes filled with tears. "There she is," Valentina said softly. "There is the woman who was there all along." Grace pressed her hand to the mirror. She could not speak. She could only look at herself and cry. Not from sadness, from recognition. She was seeing someone she thought was gone forever. The next day, Valentina took Grace shopping, not to discount stores or thrift shops, but to carefully selected boutiques where the clothes were simple, elegant, and well-made. Dominic had provided a budget, and Valentina used it wisely. She chose pieces that were versatile, classic, and flattering. A well-fitted pair of dark trousers, a white silk blouse, a soft grey blazer, a knee-length black dress with clean lines, comfortable shoes with a low heel, a camel-coloured coat that was warm and beautifully tailored. Grace tried each piece on in the dressing room, and with each new outfit, she stood a little taller. She held herself a little differently. It was not that the clothes were making her someone new, they were reminding her of someone old, someone she had buried under layers of survival. "Clothes are not vanity," Valentina told her as they walked down Madison Avenue, bags in hand. "Clothes are armor. They are communication. When you look put together, the world treats you differently. That is not fair. That is not right. But it is true, and we are going to use that truth to your advantage." Over the following days, the transformation continued. Grace was introduced to Dr. Karen Webb, a therapist who specialized in working with people who had experienced housing instability and economic hardship. Dr. Webb was calm, direct, and compassionate. She did not ask Grace to relive her worst moments. Instead, she helped Grace identify the beliefs she had built around herself during her hardest years. Beliefs like, "I am not worth helping," and "I do not deserve nice things," and "I am invisible." Together, they began to carefully, gently dismantle those beliefs and replace them with something sturdier. Grace was also introduced to Michael Torres, a career coach who had spent 15 years helping people transition into new careers. Michael was 39, Puerto Rican, born and raised in the Bronx, and he had a warmth and directness that immediately put Grace at ease. "Tell me what you are good at," he said during their first meeting. They were sitting in a small office Dominic had set up in one of his buildings in Midtown. The walls were white, the desk was clean, and the window overlooked a busy street below. Grace frowned. "I used to do administrative work." "That is what you did. I asked what you are good at." She thought about it. "I'm organized. I notice details. I am good with people, or at least I used to be. I can keep track of 100 moving pieces at once." Michael nodded. "Those are not just administrative skills, Grace. Those are management skills, project coordination skills, executive assistant skills. You have been thinking of yourself as someone who does low-level work, but the skill set you are describing is high value in the right context." Grace had never thought of it that way. She had always categorized herself as a worker, a doer, someone who kept things running in the background. She had never considered that what she did might be valuable, that it might be the kind of thing someone would seek out and pay well. For Michael began working with her on her resume, her interview skills, and her professional presence. They did mock interviews. They practiced handshakes, eye contact, and the art of answering questions with confidence without arrogance. Grace stumbled at first. She tripped over her words. She apologized too much. She made herself small. But Michael was patient, and every day she got a little better. 2 weeks into the program, something shifted inside Grace. She could feel it. It was not a dramatic movie moment epiphany. It was more like a tide coming in, slow, steady, inevitable. She started waking up earlier. She started looking forward to the day instead of dreading it. She started walking with her head up instead of her eyes on the ground. She started believing tentatively, cautiously, that maybe this was real, that maybe she was not dreaming, that maybe Dominic Moretti had meant what he said. She was staying in a small apartment that Dominic had arranged through one of his rental properties in the East Village. It was nothing extravagant. A one-bedroom with a small kitchen, a bathroom with a working shower, and a window that looked out onto a courtyard where someone had planted a small garden. But to Grace, it was a palace. She had not had her own space in over a year. She had not slept in a real bed, taken a hot shower, or cooked a meal on a stove in months. The first night she spent there, she sat on the bed and sobbed for 20 minutes. Then she washed her face, made herself a cup of tea, and sat by the window, watching the lights of the city through the glass. She thought about Dominic. She thought about his mother, Rosa. She thought about the fact that a man she did not know had looked at her, a woman most people treated as invisible, and had seen something worth investing in. She did not fully understand it. She was not sure she ever would. But she was grateful. Grateful in a way that went beyond words, beyond tears, beyond anything she could articulate. And she was determined to prove that he had not made a mistake. 3 weeks into the transformation, Grace received a phone call from Mariana. Dominic wanted to see her. He wanted to check on her progress. Grace felt a flutter of nervousness as she got ready. She chose the black dress Valentina had picked out, paired it with low heels and the camel coat. She looked at herself in the mirror of her small apartment and barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Not because she looked like someone else, but because she looked like herself again. The version of herself she had mourned. The version she thought was dead. She arrived at the townhouse at noon. Mariana greeted her at the door, and this time there was a visible reaction. Mariana's eyes widened and a slow smile spread across her face. "Grace," she said, "look at you." Grace felt herself blush. "Is it too much? I was not sure if—" "It is perfect," Mariana said. "Come, he is in the garden." The townhouse had a small garden in the back, enclosed by high stone walls and filled with evergreen shrubs, a stone fountain, and a wrought iron bench. Dominic was sitting on the bench, a cup of espresso in his hand, reading a newspaper. He looked up when Grace walked through the glass doors. For a moment he said nothing. He simply looked at her, and then he did something Grace had never seen him do before. He set down his newspaper, set down his espresso, and stood up, slowly, as if he were witnessing something that required a certain gravity. "Grace," he said. "Yes?" He shook his head slightly, not in disapproval, in something closer to wonder. "You look remarkable." "Thank you," she said, and for the first time she said it without deflecting, without minimizing, without looking away. She stood there in her black dress and her camel coat, and she accepted the compliment. She let it land. She let it matter. Dominic gestured to the bench, and they sat together. The garden was quiet except for the soft trickle of the fountain and the distant hum of the city beyond the walls. "Tell me how you are feeling," he said. Grace thought about the question, really thought about it. "I feel like I'm waking up," she said. "Like I was asleep for 2 years, and I am just now opening my eyes. Everything looks different. The city looks different, people look different, I look different. But the biggest change is not the outside, it is the inside. I am starting to believe that I am worth something. And I know that sounds simple, but for me it is the hardest thing I have ever done." Dominic nodded. "It is the hardest thing anyone can do," he said, "especially when the world has spent years telling you otherwise." They talked for over an hour. Grace told him about her sessions with Dr. Webb, about the work she was doing with Michael on her career, about the way Valentina had taught her to see clothes not as superficial, but as a form of self-expression and self-respect. She told him about the apartment, about the window overlooking the garden, about how she had started growing basil again in a small pot on the windowsill. Dominic listened to all of it with a stillness that was, in itself, a gift. In a world where everyone was always talking, always performing, always trying to be heard, Dominic Moretti knew how to listen. And Grace, who had spent so long being invisible, who had spent so long talking to no one, found in his attention a kind of validation she had not known she needed. At some point during the conversation, Dominic mentioned something that caught Grace off guard. He said that in 2 weeks he was hosting a fundraising dinner at a hotel in Midtown. It was an annual event that raised money for community programs across the city, including housing assistance, job training, and education. It was attended by business leaders, politicians, and media figures. It was, in every sense, a high-profile event. "I want you to come," Dominic said. Grace felt her stomach drop. "Come? As in attend? As my guest?" "Dominic, I cannot go to something like that. Those people, they would see right through me. They would know I do not belong." Dominic leaned forward. "Grace, listen to me. The people at that dinner, half of them are pretending to be something they are not. They are wearing masks. They are performing. You are not performing. You are becoming. And that is far more powerful than anything they will ever be." Grace opened her mouth to argue, but stopped. She thought about what Dr. Webb had been saying in their sessions, about the narratives we build around ourselves, about the stories we tell that keep us small. "I do not belong" was one of those stories. It had been playing in Grace's head for so long that she had mistaken it for truth. "Okay," she said, "I will go." Dominic smiled, that rare, softening smile. "Good. Valentina will make sure you are ready. If you are watching this and you feel like this story is speaking to you, I need you to do something right now. Leave a comment with the words, 'Everyone deserves to be seen.' Say it for Grace. Say it for yourself. Say it for anyone who has ever felt invisible. Drop that comment right now. I promise you, it matters." Over the next 2 weeks, Grace threw herself into preparation. She worked with Michael on her conversational skills, learning how to introduce herself with confidence, how to answer the inevitable question of, "What do you do?" without shame or evasion. They crafted an answer together. "I am in transition," Grace would say. "I recently came through a difficult period, and I am rebuilding my career in operations and project management." It was honest. It was dignified. It did not hide her past, but it did not define her by it either. Valentina, meanwhile, was in full creative mode. She had selected a gown for the evening, not just any gown, a deep emerald green dress with a fitted bodice, a subtle V neckline, and a flowing skirt that moved like water when Grace walked. It was elegant without being flashy, sophisticated without being cold. It was the kind of dress that made you look twice, not because it was loud, but because it was so perfectly right. Grace tried it on the day before the event. She stood in front of the full-length mirror in Valentina's studio and stared at herself. The dress fit her perfectly. Her hair was styled in loose waves that framed her face. Her makeup was subtle, just enough to highlight her features, to bring out the green of her eyes, to warm her complexion. She looked, for the first time in years, beautiful. Not in a superficial way, not in a way that was about attracting attention, beautiful in a way that was about alignment. She looked like who she was on the inside was finally matching who she was on the outside. "Valentina," she whispered, "is this really me?" Valentina stood behind her, hands on Grace's shoulders, looking at their reflection. "This was always you, Grace. We just helped you remember." The night of the fundraiser arrived. The event was held at a grand hotel in Midtown Manhattan. The ballroom was on the top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city skyline. The room was filled with round tables draped in white linen, centerpieces of white peonies and candles, and the soft sound of a string quartet playing in the corner. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting the room in a warm, amber glow. It was magnificent and terrifying. Grace arrived in a car Dominic had sent for her. She stepped out onto the red-carpeted entrance, and the cold night air hit her face. She could see people in the lobby through the glass doors, people in tuxedos and gowns, people who carried themselves with the casual confidence of those who had always belonged in rooms like this. Her heart was pounding. Her palms were sweating. Every instinct in her body was screaming at her to get back in the car, go home, put on her sweatpants, and climb into bed. This was too much. She was not ready. She was not enough. But then she heard Helen's voice. Her mother's voice. The only time you truly lose is when you stop getting up. Grace straightened her spine. She adjusted her coat. And she walked through those doors. The lobby was buzzing with conversation and laughter. A waiter offered her a glass of water with lemon, and she accepted it, grateful to have something to do with her hands. She checked her coat and caught a glimpse of herself in a mirror, the emerald dress, the loose waves, the quiet confidence in her eyes. You belong here, she told herself, not because of the dress, not because of the makeover, because you survived. And that is more than most of these people have ever had to do. She made her way to the elevator and rode it to the top floor. The doors opened and the ballroom spread out before her like a scene from a film. The music, the flowers, the lights, the skyline glittering beyond the windows. It was overwhelming, but it was also beautiful. And Grace let herself feel that beauty without guilt, without the voice in her head telling her she did not deserve it. She saw Dominic across the room. He was standing with a small group of people, holding a glass of sparkling water, listening to someone speak. He was wearing a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, and he looked every inch the powerful man he was. But when he saw Grace, when he looked across the room and found her standing there in her emerald dress, something changed in his expression. His eyes widened slightly, his lips parted, and then he smiled. Not the small, guarded smile she had seen before, a full, genuine, unguarded smile. The kind of smile that comes from seeing something you hoped for actually come true. He excused himself from the group and crossed the room toward her. People parted for him. They always did. But this time, they were also looking at Grace. Not with judgment, not with suspicion, with curiosity, with admiration. Who is that woman, their looks seemed to say. She is stunning. Dominic reached her and stood there for a moment, looking at her with an expression that was part pride, part wonder, and part something else. Something deeper that neither of them had a name for yet. Grace, he said, you are the most remarkable person in this room. Dominic, there are senators in this room. I know, and I stand by what I said. She laughed. It was a real laugh, full and warm and unguarded. And Dominic heard it and thought of his mother, Rosa, who had laughed the same way, with joy that was not afraid of itself. He offered her his arm, and she took it, and together they walked into the ballroom. The evening unfolded like something from a dream Grace had not allowed herself to have. Dominic introduced her to his circle, and she handled it with a grace that surprised even her. When people asked what she did, she delivered the line she and Michael had practiced. I am in transition. I recently came through a difficult period, and I am rebuilding in operations and project management. And what struck people was not the words themselves, but the way she said them. There was no shame, no apology, just quiet honesty, and in a room full of people who spent most of their lives curating images and managing perceptions, Grace's honesty was like a breath of fresh air. A woman named Diane Hargrove, who ran a non-profit focused on workforce development, was particularly taken with Grace. Diane was in her mid-50s, tall and sharp-featured, with silver-streaked auburn hair and the kind of direct gaze that could make you feel both seen and exposed in the same instant. Tell me more, Diane said, leaning in. They were standing near one of the tall windows, the skyline glittering behind them. What kind of operations experience do you have? Grace told her about the real estate firm, about managing schedules, coordinating transactions, keeping the office running while the agents focused on closing deals. She talked about the details, the spreadsheets, the vendor relationships, the way she could keep 20 things in her head at once and never drop a ball. Diane listened intently, her eyes narrowing in that way smart people's eyes do when they are recognizing something valuable. "You know," Diane said slowly, "I have been looking for someone to coordinate our new housing initiative. It is a pilot program, 12 months, focused on getting families into stable housing and connecting them with long-term support. It is complex. It requires someone who can manage multiple stakeholders, track dozens of cases, and keep everything moving forward. Based on what you are telling me, you might be exactly what I need." Grace felt her breath catch. "Are you serious?" "I never joke about work," Diane said with a slight smile. "Send me your resume. I will set up a formal interview. But between you and me, I have a good feeling about this." Grace nodded, not trusting herself to speak without her voice breaking. Diane squeezed her hand briefly, a gesture that said more than words could, and then moved on to another conversation. Grace stood by the window, looking out at the city. Manhattan stretched before her, a grid of lights and streets and buildings, each one containing thousands of lives, thousands of stories, thousands of people who were struggling and hoping and surviving, just like her. She pressed her hand to the cool glass and breathed. "This is real," she thought. "This is actually happening." Across the room, Dominic watched her. He had been watching her all evening, not hovering, not controlling, just observing, watching her navigate the room, watching her talk to strangers, watching her hold her own. And what he felt was something he had not expected. It was not satisfaction, though there was that. It was not pride, though there was that too. It was something more personal, something that made his chest feel tight in a way that was both uncomfortable and welcome. Dominic was not a man who let people in easily. His world did not allow for vulnerability. Every relationship he had was calculated, strategic, built on alliances and obligations. Even his friendships, such as they were, existed within a framework of mutual benefit. That was just the reality of his life. Trust was dangerous. Openness was a liability. And love, the genuine, unguarded, selfish kind of love that made people do stupid, wonderful, terrifying things, that was something Dominic had not allowed himself in a very long time. But watching Grace, seeing the light come back into her eyes, hearing her laugh, watching her stand tall in a room that would have crushed her 3 weeks ago, something shifted in him. A wall he had built a long time ago developed a crack, and through that crack, something warm and unfamiliar began to seep in. He did not name it. Not yet. He was not ready for that. But he felt it, and he did not push it away. The dinner portion of the evening began, and Grace was seated at Dominic's table along with Mariana, a city councilman named Robert Kwong, his wife, and 2 business owners from Queens. The conversation flowed easily. Grace found herself contributing, not just listening, but actually contributing, sharing opinions, asking questions, laughing at jokes, being present. At one point, Councilman Kwong turned to her and said, "Grace, Dominic tells me you are part of a new program his family is running. Can you tell me more about it?" Grace glanced at Dominic, who gave a subtle nod. "It is a transformation program," Grace said. "Not just external, everything. Career coaching, therapy, styling, mentorship. The idea is to give someone the tools to rebuild their life completely. I am the first participant." The table went quiet, not with discomfort, but with respect. There was a weight to what Grace had just said, an honesty that cut through the usual polished conversation of events like this. She had just told a table of powerful people that she had been struggling, that she had needed help, that she was still in the process of putting herself back together, and she had done it without flinching. Robert Kwong nodded slowly. "That is extraordinary," he said. "And it takes real courage to share that, thank you." His wife, a gentle-faced woman named Helen, ironically sharing the name of Grace's mother, reached across the table and touched Grace's hand. "We need more programs like this," she said. "And more people like you who are brave enough to participate." Grace felt the tears threatening again, but this time she did not fight them. She let her eyes glisten, and she smiled, and she said, "Thank you. That means more than you know." The evening continued. There were speeches. There was a live auction that raised hundreds of thousands of dollars. There was music. And through all of it, Grace felt herself expanding, not becoming someone new, but becoming more of who she already was, taking up space she had always been entitled to but had never claimed. Late in the evening, as the event was winding down and the crowd was thinning, Grace found herself standing alone on a small terrace adjacent to the ballroom. The night air was cold but clear, and the city spread out below her vast and alive. She leaned against the railing and breathed deeply. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Dominic stepping onto the terrace. He had loosened his bow tie, and his hair was slightly disheveled, which made him look more human, more approachable than she had ever seen him. "Are you hiding?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "No," she said, "just breathing. It is a lot." "It is." They stood side by side in silence for a moment, looking out at the skyline. "Dominic," Grace said quietly, "I need to ask you something." "Anything. Why me?" "Really, I know you told me about your mother, about the program, but there must be thousands of people on the streets of this city, thousands of women who need help. Why did you stop the car for me?" Dominic was quiet for a long time, so long that Grace thought he might not answer. But finally he spoke, and his voice was lower than usual, more raw. "Because you reminded me of her." "Your mother?" "No, of me." Grace turned to look at him, surprised. Dominic kept his eyes on the skyline. "When I was 19, my father was arrested. It was all over the news. The family business was raided. Our accounts were frozen. My mother was humiliated. I was pulled out of college. Overnight, I went from being Dominic Moretti, the son of one of the most respected men in Brooklyn, to Dominic Moretti, the son of a man being investigated. I lost friends. I lost relationships. People who used to shake my hand crossed the street to avoid me." He paused. "I remember sitting on a bench in Prospect Park, alone, wearing the same clothes I had worn for 3 days because I could not get into my own apartment, and I remember thinking, this is it. This is how it ends. I am nobody now." Grace listened, her heart aching. "My mother found me on that bench," Dominic continued. "She sat down beside me and she did not say anything for a long time. Then she took my hand and said, 'Dominic, you are not what they say you are. You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become.' And she took me home, and she fed me, and she started rebuilding. Not the business. Me." He finally turned to look at Grace. "When I saw you on that corner, sitting on that crate with that straight spine and those tired eyes, I saw that same thing. I saw someone who had been knocked down by forces beyond their control and was still, somehow, sitting upright, still holding on. And I thought about my mother, and I thought about that bench in the park, and I knew I had to stop the car." Grace felt the tears fall. She did not wipe them away. She let them come, warm and silent, down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. It was inadequate. She knew it was inadequate. There were no words big enough for what she felt, but she said it anyway because sometimes the simplest words are the truest. Dominic reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. He handed it to her without a word. She took it and pressed it to her eyes. They stood on the terrace together, two people who had been broken by the world and put back together in different ways, and they watched the city lights flicker and pulse and glow beneath them like a million tiny fires, each one a life, each one a story, each one burning. The days after the fundraiser passed with a momentum Grace had not felt in years. She sent her resume to Diane Hargrove the morning after the event, and within 48 hours she had an interview scheduled. Michael helped her prepare. They spent hours going over potential questions, discussing the program in detail, refining Grace's answers until they were sharp and confident, without being rehearsed. The interview was held at Diane's office in Lower Manhattan. It was a modest space for a non-profit, a converted loft with exposed brick walls and long communal tables where staff members worked on laptops, made phone calls, and coordinated with partner organizations. There was energy in the room, a sense of purpose that Grace recognized and was drawn to. These were people doing real work, hard work, work that mattered. Diane's office was at the back, separated from the main space by a glass partition. Grace sat, across from her, hands folded in her lap, and answered every question with a calm, steady directness that impressed Diane. "Tell me about a time you had to manage multiple complex situations at once," Diane said. Grace thought for a moment. "Honestly, the last 2 years of my life. Being without a home means managing 100 things most people never think about. Where to sleep, where to eat, how to stay safe, how to keep your documents dry, how to maintain your sanity. I was managing a crisis. Every single day, and I am still here. That taught me more about operations and resilience than any office job ever could." Diane stared at her. Then she smiled. "That might be the best answer I have ever gotten to that question." Grace was offered the position 3 days later, program coordinator for the new housing initiative. The salary was modest by New York standards, but to Grace, it was a fortune. It was enough to cover rent, food, transportation, and still have something left over. It was stability. It was a foundation. It was the first rung of a ladder she thought she would never find again. She called Dominic to tell him. He answered on the second ring. "I got the job," she said. Her voice was shaking with emotion. "Dominic, I got the job." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Dominic said quietly, "I am proud of you, Grace." 4 words, simple, direct. But they hit Grace with the force of everything she had been through, every cold night, every ignored glance, every time she had told herself she was nothing. 4 words from a man who had stopped his car, who had seen her, who had believed in her when she could not believe in herself. "I could not have done this without you," she said. "You could have," he replied. "You just would have done it slower." She laughed through her tears. And on the other end of the line, Dominic smiled. Grace started work the following Monday. She showed up at the office in her grey blazer and dark trousers, her hair neatly styled, her face fresh and composed. She looked professional, she looked confident, she looked like she belonged, and for the first time she felt it too. The work was demanding. The housing initiative was complex, involving partnerships with city agencies, landlords, social workers, and community organizations. Grace was responsible for tracking cases, coordinating services, scheduling meetings, managing budgets, and reporting progress. It was exactly the kind of multifaceted, high-pressure work that she was built for, and she excelled at it. Within the first month, Diane pulled her aside and told her she was doing an exceptional job. Within 2 months, Grace had streamlined the case management process, reducing response times by 30%. Within 3 months, she was being asked to present at partner meetings, explaining the initiative's progress with a clarity and confidence that made Diane beam with pride. But the transformation was not just professional, it was personal. Grace was rebuilding her life piece by piece. She furnished her small apartment with items she found at second-hand stores, carefully chosen and thoughtfully placed. She hung curtains. She bought a small rug for the living room. She planted not just basil but tomatoes, rosemary and thyme in pots on her windowsill. And one Saturday afternoon, she went to an animal shelter in the East Village and adopted a grey tabby cat with green eyes and a slightly crooked tail. She named him Oliver, because some things deserve a second chance. Her relationship with Dominic continued, but it shifted. The formal structure of the program was over. The 30 days had passed. Valentina, Michael, and Dr. Webb had done their work, and Grace was now standing on her own. But Dominic did not disappear. He called, he texted, he invited her to dinner. Not at the townhouse, but at small restaurants in Brooklyn and the Village, places where the food was good and the lighting was soft, and the conversation flowed without agenda. They talked about everything, about his family, the weight of the Moretti name, the compromises he had made, and the ones he refused to make, about her family, her mother Helen, her brothers who had moved to other states and lost touch, the father who had left and never come back. about the city, about politics, about food, about the stupidly high price of good coffee, about whether winter or summer was the best season for walking in New York. Grace said fall. Dominic said spring, and they argued about it for 20 minutes with the kind of warmth that turns disagreement into intimacy. Something was growing between them. Neither of them said it. Neither of them named it. But it was there, in the way their eyes met across a table, in the way their hands almost touched when they walked side by side, in the way they found excuses to extend their evenings together, ordering another coffee, taking a longer route home, standing on a corner in the cold and talking for just 5 more minutes. Grace was careful with it. She had been hurt before, she had been abandoned before, and she knew that Dominic's world was complicated. He was a man of power and influence, a man with enemies and obligations, a man whose life operated on a level Grace was only beginning to understand. She did not want to be naive. She did not want to confuse gratitude with something else. She did not want to fall for a man simply because he had saved her. But it was not that. Simple. Because what she felt for Dominic was not just gratitude, it was respect. It was admiration. It was a deep, quiet recognition of a kindred spirit. He had been broken too. He had been rebuilt too. He understood in a way few people could what it meant to lose everything and choose to come back. And Dominic, for his part, was struggling with the same thing. He had not expected this. He had started the program to honor his mother, to do something good, to silence the voice in his head that told him he had waited too long. He had not expected to find in Grace someone who made him feel seen. Not as the boss, not as the Moretti name, not as the man in the expensive coat, but as Dominic. Just Dominic, the boy who had sat on a bench in Prospect Park and been afraid. One evening in late March, they had dinner at a small Italian restaurant in Carroll Gardens. The place was family-owned, with checkered tablecloths and candles in old wine bottles, and the smell of garlic and tomatoes heavy, in the air. They shared a bottle of red wine and a plate of pasta and talked until the restaurant was nearly empty. As they walked out into the cool night air, Grace stopped on the sidewalk and looked at him. Dominic. Yes? I need to say something. He waited, his dark eyes steady on hers. I am scared, she said, of this, of whatever this is between us. I am scared because the last time I trusted someone, the last time I let myself depend on anyone, it ended badly. And you are not, just anyone. You are Dominic Moretti. Your life is, I do not even know how to describe it. It is a world I do not understand. And I am just now getting my feet under me. I am just now learning to stand on my own again. And I am terrified that if I let myself feel what I am feeling, I will lose myself again. Dominic listened to every word. He did not interrupt. He did not reassure her prematurely. He stood there on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, and he gave her the space to say everything she needed to say. When she was done, he said, Grace, I am not going to tell you not to be scared. Fear makes sense. After what you have been through, it would be strange if you were not scared. But I am going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it. She nodded. I am not looking for someone to depend on me. I already have plenty of that. I have people who need things from me every single day. What I am looking for, what I did not even know I was looking for until I met you, is someone who does not need me at all. Someone who stands on her own. Someone who chooses to be with me, not because she has to, but because she wants to. That is what you are becoming, Grace. And that is why I am standing here. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and powerful, like a bridge made of glass. Grace looked at him. His face, lined and strong and softened by the streetlight, was the face of a man who was telling the truth. She could see it in his eyes. She could feel it in the stillness between them. She stepped closer. She reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and firm and steady. Okay, she whispered. Okay, he repeated. And they stood there on the sidewalk in Carroll Gardens, holding hands like two teenagers on a first date, and the city moved around them, indifferent and beautiful and alive. 4 months had passed since that cold Tuesday morning when Grace Holloway sat on a milk crate on the corner. Faux Flatbush and Atlantic, invisible to the world. 4 months since a black Escalade pulled over, and a man with silver-streaked hair and dark, knowing eyes handed her a business card and said, "A chance." In those 4 months, Grace had been transformed, but not in the way the word is usually used. She had not been made into someone new. She had been returned to herself. The makeover, the clothes, the styling, those were just the surface. Underneath, something far more profound had taken place. Grace had rebuilt her sense of worth. She had remembered who she was. She had reclaimed the dignity that the world had stripped away. She was sitting at her desk at the non-profit one afternoon when Diane Hargrove walked into her office. Diane had a strange expression on her face, part excitement, part nervousness, which was unusual for a woman who was generally unflappable. "Grace, I need to talk to you about something." "Okay." Diane sat down. "You know the annual city gala is next month. The one where the mayor recognizes individuals and organizations making a difference in the community." Grace nodded. "Of course. We submitted the housing initiative for consideration." "We did. And they want to feature it. But they do not just want to talk about the program. They want to talk about you." Grace blinked. "Me?" "A reporter from one of the city's major outlets reached out. They are doing a segment on people who have overcome extraordinary challenges to make a positive impact. Someone mentioned your name, I do not know who. But they want to interview you, they want to tell your story." Grace felt her heart rate spike. Her first instinct was to say no, absolutely not. The thought of standing in front of cameras, of having her past laid bare for the world to see, was terrifying. She had spent 2 years being invisible, and while she no longer wanted to be invisible, she was not sure she was ready to be seen on that scale. But then she thought about something. She thought about all the women who were sitting on milk crates right now all over the city. Women who had been laid off, evicted, abandoned. Women who were invisible. Women who had stopped hoping. And she thought about what it would mean for one of them to turn on the television and see someone who had been where they were, wearing what they had worn, feeling what they felt, standing in front of the camera and saying, "I was there, and I am here now, and if I can do it, so can you." "Okay," Grace said. "I will." "Do it," Diane smiled. "I was hoping you would say that." The interview was filmed the following week. It took place in Grace's apartment, which the crew found charming and photogenic, the small pots of herbs on the windowsill, the bookshelf she had slowly been filling, Oliver sleeping on the back of the couch. Grace wore the white silk blouse and dark trousers, simple and elegant, and she spoke with a calm, steady voice that captivated the interviewer. She told her story. All of it. The job, loss, the eviction, the months on the street, the milk crate, the business card. Dominic, though she did not use his full name. The program, the transformation, the job, the rebuilding. "What was the hardest part?" the interviewer asked. Grace thought for a long moment. The hardest part was not the cold, it was not the hunger, it was not even the loneliness, although that was brutal. The hardest part was losing my sense of self. When you are on the street, the world tells you that you are nothing. Every averted gaze, every person who steps around you, every day you wake up and there is nothing to do and nowhere to go, it all says the same thing. You do not matter. And after a while, you start to believe it. Getting that belief out of your head, that was the hardest part. That is still the hardest part some days. The interviewer paused, visibly moved. "And what would you say to someone who is in that place right now?" Grace looked directly into the camera. "I would say, you are not what happened to you. You are not your worst day. You are not the circumstances that brought you here. You are still the person you were before all of this started. That person is not gone. She is just buried. And with the right help, the right support, and a little bit of courage, she can come back. I am living proof." The segment aired the following week. It went viral within hours. Millions of views, thousands of comments, people sharing their own stories of hardship and recovery, people tagging friends and family, people crying, people reaching out to non-profits, people donating. The response was overwhelming. Grace's phone did not stop ringing for days. Diane's office was flooded with inquiries. Other non-profits wanted to partner. Corporations wanted to donate. The city council wanted to discuss expanding the housing initiative. And 3 other organizations asked if they could create similar transformation programs based on the model that Dominic had started. Grace was not prepared for any of it. She was not prepared for the emails from women who told her they were sitting in shelters right now, watching her video on their phones and crying. She was not prepared for the letters from children who said their mothers had been through the same thing. She was not prepared for the weight of it all, the knowledge that her story, her pain, her rebuilding had become a source of hope for strangers she would never meet. It was a lot, but it was also everything. Dominic, characteristically, stayed in the background. He did not seek credit. He did not give interviews. He did not want his name attached to the story. When a reporter managed to track him down and asked for a comment, he said only, "This is not my story. It is hers." But privately, in the quiet of his townhouse, sitting in the garden where he and Grace had first talked about her progress, Dominic Moretti felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Peace. Not the absence of conflict, which was something his life would never have, but a deeper peace, the kind that comes from knowing you have done something right, something pure, something your mother would have been proud of. He thought about Rosa. He thought about her hands on his face. He thought about her voice saying, "God will judge you by your mercy." And for the first time in the 6 years since her death, Dominic felt that maybe, just maybe, he had earned a measure of that mercy. One evening, about a week after the interview, Grace showed up at Dominic's townhouse unannounced. Mariana let her in with a knowing smile and directed her to the study, a room lined with bookshelves and lit by a single desk lamp. Dominic was reading in an armchair, a glass of red wine on the table beside him, Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens, which made Grace laugh when she saw it. "Appropriate reading material," she said from the doorway. He looked up and smiled. "I have always had a soft spot for orphans who find their way." She walked in and sat in the chair across from him. She was dressed casually, jeans and a sweater and the camel coat draped over her arm. Her hair was down, her face free of makeup. She looked relaxed and real and radiant. "I came to tell you something," she said. "I am listening." "The response to the interview has been incredible, but it has also made me think. About the program, about what you did for me, and I have a proposal." Dominic raised an eyebrow. "I want to formalize it," Grace said. "I want to create a non-profit, a foundation, dedicated to doing for other women what you did for me. Not just the styling and the career coaching, but all of it. The therapy, the housing, the mentorship, the whole thing. I want to build it into something that can scale, something that can reach women in every borough, eventually in other cities, and I want to name it after your mother." Dominic was quiet for a long time. He set down his book. He picked up his wine glass, but did not drink from it. He just held it, turning it slowly in his hand, staring at the dark red liquid. "The Rosa Moretti Foundation," Grace said softly. Dominic closed his eyes, and when he opened them, they were bright with emotion he almost never showed. "She would have loved that," he said, his voice rough. "I know," Grace said. "That is why I want to do it. You know this will be an enormous undertaking." "I do." "You know it will take years to build." "I do." "You know you will face obstacles, bureaucracy, skeptics, people who will try to tear it down." "I know." Dominic looked at her. "And you are ready for that?" Grace met his gaze. "Dominic, I slept on a milk crate in February. I think I can handle a little bureaucracy." He laughed. A real, full, unexpected laugh that filled the study and made the shadows retreat. Grace laughed too, and for a moment they were just 2 people in a warm room, laughing at the absurdity and beauty of life. "Okay," Dominic said, "let us do it." And they did. Over. The next several months, Grace and Dominic worked together to build the Rosa Moretti Foundation. Dominic provided the initial funding and the business infrastructure. Grace provided the vision, the operational plan, and the heart. Diane Hargrove became an advisor. Michael Torres joined as head of the Career Development Program. Valentina Cruz volunteered to run the personal presentation workshops. Even Dr. Webb agreed to train a team of therapists who would provide mental health support to participants. The foundation launched with a small pilot program, serving 12 women in its first cohort. They came from shelters, from the streets, from situations of housing instability and economic hardship. They were different ages, different backgrounds, different stories, but they all had one thing in common. They had been forgotten, and the Rosa Moretti Foundation was determined to remember them. Grace oversaw every aspect of the program. She was there when the women arrived, nervous and skeptical, just as she had been. She was there when they got their first haircuts, their first new clothes, their first session with a therapist. She was there when they stumbled and when they stood back up. She was there because she understood, in a way that no one else could, what it felt like to be in their shoes. And she told each of them the same thing Dominic had told her. This is not charity. This is a chance. The first cohort graduated after 3 months. 10 of the 12 women had secured employment. All 12 had stable housing. The 2 who had not yet found jobs were enrolled in additional training programs and were making progress. The results were remarkable, and they caught the attention of the city. The mayor invited Grace to speak at a community event. She stood on a stage in front of hundreds of people and told her story again. But this time it was not just her story. It was the story of the 12 women who had come after her. It was the story of Rosa Moretti, a woman who believed in mercy. It was the story of Dominic, a man who had honored his mother's wish. And it was the story of a city that, despite its hardness, despite its indifference, still had room for Grace. The audience gave her a standing ovation. Grace stood at the podium, looking out at the faces, some of them crying, some of them cheering, and she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt whole. After the event, Dominic was waiting for her backstage. He was leaning against a wall, arms crossed, that same subtle smile on his face. "Not bad for a woman who was sitting on a milk crate 4 months ago," he said. Grace walked up to him and stood close. "Not bad for a man who almost drove past." "I almost did." "Why did you not?" Dominic looked at her. "Because my mother's voice was louder than the traffic." Grace reached up and straightened his tie, a gesture that was small and intimate and spoke of a closeness that had grown quietly and steadily over the months. Dominic caught her hand and held it. "Grace." "Yes?" "Thank you." She frowned. "For what?" "For showing me that the thing my mother asked me to do, it was not just about helping other people. It was about saving myself too." Grace felt her heart swell. She squeezed his hand. "We saved each other, Dominic." And she meant it, because the truth was, Grace's transformation had not been a one-way street. Dominic had not simply rescued her. He had not been the hero riding in on a horse. He had been a man carrying his own weight, his own grief, his own unfinished business with the world, and in reaching out to Grace, he had found something he did not know he was missing: purpose, connection. The kind of love that is not about need or dependency, but about 2 people choosing each other day after day. Not because they have to, but because they want to. The foundation grew. The second cohort was larger, then the third. Within a year, the Rosa Moretti Foundation was serving over 100 women across 3 boroughs. It had partnerships with major corporations, endorsements from city officials, and a waiting list that stretched months into the future. It was covered by national outlets. It was studied by academic researchers. It became a model for similar programs across the country, and Grace Holloway, the woman who had been invisible, was at the center of all of it, not as a figurehead, not as a symbol, as a leader, a builder, a woman who had taken the worst thing that had ever happened to her and turned it into the best thing she had ever done. She still kept the business card, the cream-colored card with just Dominic on it and a phone number. She kept it in the top drawer of her desk at the Foundation's new office, which was a bright, airy space in a converted warehouse in Dumbo, Brooklyn, with exposed brick and tall windows that looked out over the East River and the Manhattan skyline. Sometimes on hard days, when the work was overwhelming and The obstacles felt insurmountable, and the voice in her head tried to tell her she was still that woman on the milk crate. She would open the drawer and look at the card. She would run her fingers over the embossed letters and remember that cold Tuesday morning. She would remember the man who stopped his car, the man who saw her when no one else did, and she would close the drawer, take a deep breath, and get back to work. Because Grace Holloway knew something most people never learn. She knew that the distance between invisible and extraordinary is not as far as you think. It is the distance of one outstretched hand, one moment of recognition, one chance. And sometimes all it takes to change a life is for someone to stop the car. The Mafia boss gave a makeover to a sloppy woman. Her new flawless look stunned everyone, but the real story was never about the makeover. It was about what happens when someone with power chooses to use it for mercy. It was about what happens when a woman who has lost everything discovers that everything she needs was inside her all along. And it was about a promise made by a mother to her son, a promise that echoed through the years and changed 2 lives forever. Grace still grows basil on her windowsill. Oliver the cat still sleeps on the back of the couch, and every morning Grace Holloway wakes up, looks in the mirror, and sees someone she is proud to be. That is the real transformation, not the dress, not the hair, not the emerald gown at the fundraiser. The real transformation is looking in the mirror and knowing, truly knowing that you are enough, and you always were. If you watch this all the way to the end, it is because this story touched something inside you, and I want to know who you are. Leave a comment right now saying I watched until the end so I can get to know the people who truly care about the stories on this channel. Your comment means the world to me. And if this story moved you, if it made you feel something, if it made you think about someone in your life who needs a second chance, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Sometimes a single story can change a person's entire perspective, and you never know who in your circle needs exactly this message right now. And if you are not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? This channel brings you stories that stay with you long after the video ends. Stories about real people, real struggles, and real hope. Subscribe now and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story, because the next one might be the one that changes everything. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, you are never too far gone for a second chance. You never were.